more and more folks like me who worked for Donald Trump, supported Donald Trump. I was actually one of his national co-chairman of the 2020 election, who are now saying, you know what? It's not worth it anymore. It is too much baggage. It's time for generational change. We've got good folks on the bench in DeSantis and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. It's time for new leadership. When more and more folks like that start coming out of the woodwork, that's when you'll know that Donald Trump has a significant problem.
The committee investigating the violence at the United States Capitol on January the 6th last year has recommended that Donald Trump should face criminal charges.
The judge concluded that both former President Donald Trump and John Eastman likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump for assisting or aiding and comforting those at the Capitol who engaged in a violent attack on the United States.
Well, that was Representative Jamie Raskin speaking there. Voting on its final report, written after interviewing more than 1,000 witnesses, the committee unanimously recommended that the former president face 4 charges: insurrection, obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and conspiracy to make false statements to the federal government. Well, the committee vice chair, Republican Liz Cheney, said the former president is unfit for any office.
In addition to being unlawful, as described in our report, this was an utter moral failure and a clear dereliction of duty. Evidence of this can be seen in the testimony of President Trump's own White House counsel and several other White House witnesses. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office. The committee recognizes that our work has only begun. It's only the initial step in addressing President Trump's effort to remain in office illegally. Prosecutors are considering the implications of the conduct that we describe in our report.
Well, that was Liz Cheney, who, of course, went against the views of many within the Republican Party in those findings there. Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, I should say, was also accused of obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress and conspiracy to defraud the United States. So what will it all mean for the former president as he decides whether he probably, will run again in 2024? Well, let's talk to Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff to Donald Trump. Good evening to you, Mick.
Carol, good evening to you. Thank you as always for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us. How significant do you think are the findings of this committee?
They're dramatic and they're historic, but they're probably not significant. And here's why I say that. Under our system, the legislative branch doesn't really do much in terms of investigations and does nothing in terms of law enforcement. So this was a political investigation. They found some very interesting information, and they've given that now to the Department of Justice. But the Department of Justice, which is an executive branch agency, will make the decision on whether or not to charge Donald Trump. And I don't think anything that happened today changes that one way or the other. I think the Department of Justice is likely to charge Donald Trump, but I don't think they're more or less likely to do so because of what Congress did today, if that makes any sense.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you would think that if you had a powerful congressional committee that has spent many hours taking evidence, that's gone through documents and so on, and it is saying that Donald Trump should face charges, does that not then mean that the US State Department have to look at what this committee have found, and surely that makes it more likely that they would press charges?
Keep in mind, the Department of Justice is already doing its own investigation. They've already issued subpoenas, they already have a grand jury, and they've already asked the committee, the congressional committee, to share their evidence. So, yes, there's a referral. And again, it is a historic moment. It's the first time a former president has ever been criminally referred to the Department of Justice by Congress. And there's no underestimating the importance of that. But in terms of the likelihood versus unlikelihood of being charged, I don't think it makes a difference, because the Department of Justice is set up to do this and is probably ahead of Congress anyway in terms of what they've been able to gather so far.
So just while we're talking about this process, what about that Department of Justice investigation? When are we likely to hear whether they're going to go ahead and press charges as the committee is recommending?
Yeah, they are famously non-transparent, and that's by law, by the way. They're not supposed to comment on even the existence of ongoing investigations under our system. So it's almost impossible to anticipate. We just know that for the last several months they have been investigating. Several high-ranking members of the Trump administration have been called before the grand jury by the Department of Justice. We understand they've cooperated with that grand jury and have given testimony to that grand jury. But it's one of those things, Carol, it could be tomorrow and it could be a year from now, or it could be never. You just never know with the Department of Justice, and that's by design under our system.
So they won't feel themselves under further pressure to say or do something about this, despite the high profile nature of this committee.
That's correct. In fact, that's by design. They will tell you that they are famously non-political, and that they ignore politics or try to do so. In fact, they come under significant criticism when they do something different or outside of that model. Some people think that the raid at Mar-a-Lago last August was outside of the model, was politically motivated. But the Department of Justice is famously non-political. They will go to great lengths to tell you they do not listen to any White House, including when they're in the same party. They do not listen to Congress. They do what they do. And my guess is that's exactly what's going to happen here.
So, I mean, what about Donald Trump then? Clearly, he's been suggesting pretty strongly he's going to run again in 2024. He's always been very dismissive of this committee. I mean, what do you know about what he makes of this?
Yeah, it's not that he might run. He's actually formally announced, and under our election system, that makes that has significance. You have to file papers, then you have to do certain disclosures. You have to handle money in a certain way. So he is a formally and officially a candidate for president in 2024. Could he back out? Certainly he could, but he is already announced. I don't think this changes that one bit, one way or the other. I think he's certainly wounded politically, Carol. There's no question. This hearing has hurt him. The midterms hurt him. He announced early, much earlier than anybody else in recent memory, to run for reelection in an attempt to keep other Republicans out of a potential primary, and that's not working. Several Republicans, you would know all the names: Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, are all gearing up to run in 2024. So he's certainly wounded by this, but I don't think it's going to take him out of the race.
We know how divided American politics is. Clearly, those hardcore Trump supporters are going to carry on siding with the former president, accusing this committee of being a kind of political conspiracy against him. But surely it will make some in the Republican Party think again about whether he's the right person to be their candidate in 2024.
Oh, it already has. Every single day, there's another story that breaks here that undermines his support. Keep in mind, there's a lot of Republicans who didn't support him in the first place. There were never Trumper Republicans going back as far as 2016. And those folks, not surprisingly, are still against Donald Trump. But this week, for example, he released this non-fungible token, these NFT trading cards for $100 for Christmas. And he got a tremendous backlash from his base. In fact, one of the people who was arrested for the January 6 riots and is going to jail made a comment that he can't believe he's going to jail for an NFT salesman. So he's making mistakes upon mistakes here, and it is undermining support. Yes, there's still the hardcore base, but even more recently, some of that base, and I want to emphasize just some, has started to scratch their heads and wonder if there's not a better way.
Because this isn't the only potential legal proceedings he's facing. A whole series of other different investigations and possible prosecutions are looming.
That's right. He's got a couple of actions in New York State, one in Georgia. And the interesting thing about that is that if you move a couple of moves down the chessboard and you ask yourself, well, what if Donald Trump supports Ron DeSantis and Ron DeSantis gets elected president, would he pardon President Trump for any possible crimes? That's certainly something that's worth discussing. But whatever would happen, the future president does not have the ability to pardon crimes that happen at the state level. So these things that are going on in Georgia and New York and whatever other states might be going forward are not the kind of things that a future president can pardon. And they're a lot stickier. And I think for that reason, or amongst others, they create a lot more of a headache for the Trump team than, say, the January 6th Commission, which doesn't have that much teeth.
And if the Department of Justice were to actually formally charge him, surely that would mean that he couldn't stand.
No, it's actually not true. The way our system works is that as long as you are 35 years old and a natural-born citizen, you can run. The only people that can deprive somebody of the right to run for office if they are constitutionally qualified, is Congress. Congress can vote to deny you that right, but that's about it. So, in fact, technically, under our system, you could be president from jail. Because our Constitution is written that way. All you have to do is be 35 years old and a natural born citizen, and Donald Trump is both of those things.
It really is a quite extraordinary scenario, which is quite difficult to understand looking at it from across the pond here. But how has this gone down? I mean, have the reactions really just fallen along the predictable lines of the political divide that we were talking about?
For the most part, yes. But there are folks, and I count myself as one of them, who have defended Donald Trump in the past. Yes, I quit my job over what I considered to be dereliction of duty on January 6th, but that's not the same as saying there's a crime. So I was defended him for a period of time until the January 6th Commission provided evidence that maybe he was complicit. But there's folks like me, and more folks like me, who worked for Donald Trump, supported Donald Trump. I was actually one of his national co-chairman of the 2020 election, who are now saying, you know what? It's not worth it anymore. It is too much baggage. It's time for generational change. We've got good folks on the bench in DeSantis and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. It's time for new leadership. When more and more folks like that start coming out of the woodwork, that's when you'll know that Donald Trump has a significant problem.
And in the meantime, for President Biden and the Democrats, they are presumably really pleased that the former president, who spent so long denying the result and continues to deny the result of the last election, is perhaps taking a step closer, facing a possible prosecution.
Oh, I can assure you that most Democrats in the country are very happy to see him face possible criminal charges. So that's probably not surprising. I think the better question is whether or not this changes Joe Biden's political future. There's a lot of discussion here that if Donald Trump does in fact run, that Joe Biden will run for re-election. But if Donald Trump, for whatever reason, be it a congressional action or be it just he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore, there's a lot more discussion about Biden not running, that he could run against Trump and win against Trump, but if he doesn't want to run against one of the younger Republicans, and there's other Democrats who feel the same way because they want their younger generation there as quickly as possible as well. So, yeah, I'm sure the Democrats are enjoying it, just like Republicans did when Clinton got impeached. That's the nature of the game. But the better question, I think, is how does this impact 2024? And we're still a good ways away from seeing what that impact will be.
Mick Mulvaney, former Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, really good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Carol. Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to you too.